The next thing we're going to look at is mate guarding, which is really the result of males wanting to guarantee their paternity. And mate guarding can be fairly innocuous or completely extreme. For the little marsupial on the left, it will engage in almost constant sexual intercourse for 2 weeks with individual sessions lasting for up to 14 hours. He will continue to find new mates and reproduce literally until he dies. He expends so much energy and is so little engaged in his own protection and sustenance that he begins to bleed internally and then is subject to both parasites and disease and dies shortly after the intercourse is over. And for some frogs, they will engage in one continuous action of intercourse for up to several months, which would be a human equivalent of mating continuously for 10 years. Well, if you're going to do that, you can be pretty darn certain that any of the eggs laid by that female are indeed yours. The entire time that she is available, you have kept her occupied. Some insects, and some other animals as well, will use copulatory plugs, and with this, the male will either secrete mucus after the sperm has been released into the female so that it literally forms a barricade for other males in the species, and the female is no longer capable of engaging in intercourse. Or what they'll do is, some spiders will do this, is rip off their reproductive organs inside of the female, forming, again, a barricade and preventing penetration by any other males. And so why is this so common in males and so uncommon in females? And really it comes back to that uncertainty of parentage. Males cannot be guaranteed that they are the parent, whereas females are. So males in general will be more aggressive towards both the females to keep them in line so that they do not engage with other males and to prevent other males from having access to their females. So take a minute to answer this one and unpause the video when you're ready for the answer. And hopefully you realize that it was number 2 because of paternal uncertainty. And so we can look at different mating practices, both in humans and in other animals, and there are 2 basic types, monogamy and polygamy. And in polygamous relationships, one individual will have multiple mates. And in monogamous relationships, the individuals mate with just one other individual and stay with that individual generally for their lifetimes, although sometimes they'll have annual monogamous relationships. They only have one mate at a time, but each year they're subject to change mates, and that would still be considered monogamy. But then polygamy is subdivided into 2 separate categories. Polygyny, in which the male has multiple females, this is far more common, and also polyandry, where the female has multiple male mates. And obviously, because of the frequent need for women to engage in gestation and child rearing, or sorry, females to engage in gestation and child rearing, this is not as common, but in species where it's practical, sometimes the male and the female will switch these more common roles, and the females will have multiple male mates. And if you look at birds and mammals, you can notice a pretty sharp contrast. So pause the video while you take a moment to look at the different pictures and see if there are some differences that you can recognize between these. And hopefully you were able to recognize that with the birds, it's really hard to tell which one's which is the male and which is the female. And in each of the mammalian species, they're quite distinctive. The males in each case are much larger and have some accessory features. The lion has the mane, the orangutan has whatever that chin thing is and ornate head structures, and the deer has the long antlers. So in each case, the male and the female don't look quite identical, whereas in the bird species, at least these, they do look the same. And this can tell us something about the mating practices. So if you look at it, oh, sorry, I guess I should have said what these mating practices are, I apologize. With the species where it's difficult to tell, the geese, the lorikeets, the swans, the reason they look so similar is that they engage in shared parenting, and they're what's called sexually monomorphic. They have the same appearance, whereas in the mammals, the males and the females are sexually dimorphic. They have two different appearances. And as we look at this, we can see a graph of how many children each gender, each sex tends to have. And if we look at the number of children that males have and the number of children that females have, females tend to fall into a small range of 1 to 5 children, whereas men are all over the place, up to as many as 23 offspring. This is characteristic of polygamy, of males having multiple female mates. And so we see again this sexual monomorphism. Both parents are investing in child rearing, and you see both geese with all the little goslings. They tend to be monogamous. They will stay with one lifelong mate. And they're going to both tend to be choosy when they're trying to select a mate, because they essentially need to find a winner, because the mate that they find is going to be the mate that they stay with, and they want the most likely success for their offspring. Whereas with sexual dimorphism, one parent is going to invest a far longer period of time in child rearing, and in mammals it's almost exclusively the female. They're going to tend towards polygamy, but specifically polygyny, where the male will have multiple female mates. The females tend to be choosy. They're only going to want the biggest, the best, the strongest, the most fit males. And the males are generally going to compete for access to the females. Generally, the territorial battles are not so much to keep the land because they want the land, it's to keep the land because they want the other males out of their way. And you can see the two elephant seals fighting in the picture on the bottom right, which is a link to a video. And so the body size can tell you a lot about the mating practices. When you have a lot of competition between individuals, that is generally going to be for access to females. The larger body size is going to tend to be only found in the individuals who are competing, so just one sex, again, usually males, but not always. And so by looking at a lot of bird species, you can see that they're really hard to tell which is the male and which is the female. And what that's going to tell us about their mating practices is that they tend to be monogamous. And if you look at humans, men tend to be larger and in other ways sexually dimorphic in terms of the amount of body hair, facial hair, how they develop their musculature. All of these are different from females. And that tells us that in our early history, we came from a society, from organisms that were polygamous. And in societal norms, at least in Western civilization, we don't tend to like that, but that is our heritage. And so by looking at them, pause the video until you determine which one would most likely be monogamous. And hopefully you realize that it should be number 2, the geese, since they are birds. Chickens will look different from a rooster. Cattle, the cow looks different from the bull. So those are sexually dimorphic and will tend to be polygamous, but the geese tend to be monogamous and thus look very much the same.